Welcome back to the skating session. My name is Tony Wheeler,
And I'm Thomas Vu.
and we are back with episode 8. We are going to talk all about the neutral athletes. The IOC just put out a press release, I believe, yesterday, detailing the skaters that went through the screening process and are able to go to the Olympic qualifying competition in September and potentially earn a spot into the 2026 Olympics. So, like I said, the big news, the ISU announced the eligible neutral athletes. It doesn't mean that they are automatically getting into the Olympics. They have to go through the qualifying process that we see each early Olympic season. Typically, in the past, it's been Nebelhorn Trophy. This year, they actually created a brand new competition just for the sake of Olympic qualifying, and it will only feature athletes, one from each country, that are able to either earn their first Olympic entry or in some cases earn an additional entry based on the World Championships results.
Yeah, because in the past they used to just add it to Nebelhorn, and
Yeah,
regular Nebelhorn was still happening, and
yeah,
federations had to
yeah.
basically say which ones are part of the qualifying competition and who's just here for
Right.
the regular. And I still remember me as a fan constantly asking people like you, like, who's here for the qualifying and who's
Right.
not? Can you just so my brain can? Yeah,
Yeah, I remember
no worries this time.
in 2021 there was a I think the only country where that happened was Turkey with the men,
Oh,
and they actually finished both men finished in eighth and ninth place, and the top seven were the ones who ended up qualifying. But I remember there was some question about if they choose the wrong person and they would be in the qualifying spot, then they would not get that spot. In the past, I remember it used to be just so many athletes from all over the place, but I think they really last time around at least it wasn't so much the multiple entries anymore. But anyways, it is going to be in Beijing. It's in September, before the Grand Prix, before any of the really big events start for the season. I was going to consider changing my vacation to Asia instead of Europe this year, and then I was thinking that would be interesting just to maybe go to this competition, but ultimately I'm still going to stick with Europe. So I will be in the middle of the Mediterranean when this event goes on, but I will be very interested in watching what plays out with it. Really, really big news, I guess, as far as which skaters are able to qualify is there are no pairs teams or no ice dancers from Russia that went through the screening process and were accepted into this competition.
and, and it's not just that; it's that we'll get into it, but a lot of it's that they really only had one shot. You had to pick one person as your entry, and then you could pick a substitute. And if your primary entry didn't qualify, like failed to meet the criteria, the subs weren't even considered. So it's extra. Yeah, we'll get into it, but
Yeah, especially when you look at pairs, we'll get into that. But
oh yeah.
the very limited amount of entries you have there, it kind of gives some breathing room to some of these teams. But
Yeah.
anyways, who we do end up having for the men, Peter Gumennik, and is the entry that will go to China, and then Vladislav Dzitsky, who is Russian national champion and has a quad axel in his arsenal. He is the substitute. And then for the women, we have Adelia Petrosian, who really, ever since the last Olympic cycle, she's really been making a name for herself, and now she is at the
Mm.
absolute top of Russian women's skating. She is the entry, and then the substitute is Alina Gorbacheva. Uh, there was some question yesterday, I know, whether the first listed skater was actually the entry or if it was just alphabetic. I went in and I looked at the Cyrillic alphabet actually to see if maybe they were listed by their last name Cyrillic, and it did. In the case, I think, of the men, it was that way, but then in the
Oh,
women, it
okay.
was not. So I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure this is actually, these are the two that have been chosen, and then the others are substitutes. One question I have for you, because I haven't researched this probably as
Yeah.
much maybe as you've seen, but in the event that the skater, let's say Gumennik, goes for the men and he ends up earning the spot, could the substitute then potentially take that Olympic spot based on whatever qualifying they have? Or is that spot in this case going to that athlete? Do you know?
So, based on my reading, it can only go to the substitute if the primary entry cannot compete for some reason,
Okay.
injury, and the sub was only allowed for that reason. In
Okay.
case your primary athlete is injured, something happens, they can't go. I, I I don't know if there's anything they need to submit other than some attestation that this skater's injured, therefore, this skater can go instead.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah,
There's nothing clear about that.
because it's very, they had to now Russia is banned for their reasons, but it's kind of a disadvantage for them to have to pick
Yeah.
in May who potentially is going to be at their peak in February of next year. With other skaters, you are in this spot and then you send whoever you want. Russia doesn't have that luxury. So it was, as we said with the pairs and dance, they had that one chance, and if their ultimate first choice did not make it, then nothing else was considered. So it's interesting though. I would think Vladislav, just on the basis of having a quad axle, would be potentially in people's minds the more exciting one to try to
Right.
challenge Ilya Malinin. But it looks
But
like if go ahead.
yeah. And he's never competed though in ISU competition, right?
No, no.
Vladislav, but Gumennik has. And because we've
Right.
seen Gumennik. And of the four, I'm really only familiar with Gumennik skating.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I had to go find
We
videos
both of us did, yeah.
because
Yep.
I have not been keeping up with Russian skating at all. It's just been something that I haven't really been interested in. And I really only came out to watch, these skaters.
Yeah. I like in the last 12 hours, basically.
Pretty
Um,
much. Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I remember at the beginning I was curious because Russia, I will say Russia did an excellent job of promoting their competitions and they made it accessible on YouTube to everybody and the numbers of people viewing were
Yeah, they were
so much
huge.
more than what the
Oh,
ISU would pull in their
I remember
competition.
being at Skate America and overhearing people talk about how they were going to go home and watch the competitions on
Yeah.
YouTube from like
Yeah.
Russia Channel 1. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, so definitely it was still being watched by fans,
Yeah. So
just
just
not us.
I don't I watched so much skating, but this was just a whole extra layer. If it's not ISU, if it's not serious competition, nationals I'm okay with, but even the domestic competitions, I'm kind of like, So when you go to
Right.
Russia and you have this Russian Grand Prix and all this stuff they've created since they've been out of competition, just for me, it's a little bit of too much to follow. So
Yeah.
honestly, I haven't. I've seen a clip here or there, but for the most part, I had to familiarize myself with all of these skaters. So, like I said, Olympic qualifying competition is September 17th through the 21st. It's in Beijing. Let's talk about how many spots there are for each
Yeah.
discipline. Men and women each have five. It was typically six or more, potentially based on what would happen at Worlds, but it is down to five because of the Olympic quota is now dropped from 30 skaters to 29 in the men's and women's competition in order to make room for other events. There's an overall quota for the Olympics, and skaters, they think taking one skater out of each of those competitions is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Pairs only have three spots though, so now we're down 16 qualified at Worlds, three qualify at this competitions for a total of 19 as opposed to 20. And then in ice dance, I believe in the last few Olympic cycles, I think the number used to be 25, maybe not, but it was 24 for a while, and now it's down to 23. So there's this weird 19 qualify at Worlds, and then an additional four will qualify in
Yeah.
Beijing.
And it used to be easy. If you make the free dance or the long, you qualified a spot, right, for your country. That's no longer the case. We can talk a little bit about that later. I totally agree with Tony's point of view on this, but we'll get to that.
Yeah,
But used to be easy.
yeah, not so much anymore, just because of
Mhm. Weird rules.
the numbers that they're cutting off, and they added
Yeah.
more pairs to the free skate and all this stuff. So let's talk. Let's go. Let's circle back to the fact that there's no pairs or ice dancers in
Yeah.
the qualifying competition, so there will not be
Yeah.
anyone to shake up the Olympic event. I think it hits the most in the pairs competition because you have two teams that were potentially threatening to be the best in the world.
Mhm.
You have former world champions in Machina and Galyamov, who were bronze medalists in 2022.
Right. And then right
They,
behind them, they're still
yeah,
competing with Boykova and Kozlowski,
yeah, and they've kind of gone back
domestically.
and forth from what I've seen.
Hmm.
I did read that I believe that Galyamov was on some outdoor ice rink for some competition that Russia had, and he potentially has a broken leg right now.
Oh,
I read that somewhere. I don't think
yeah.
that's been officially announced. I still follow him on Instagram, and I'll just throw that in right now. I reached out to both him and Ivan Bukin to see. I just asked were you given in writing a reason why you were not considered for this? Any other additional comments you can give me? I'm pretty sure they don't want to talk to some random American. Neither one replied to me. I wasn't unexpected, but I'm truly curious if they were
Yeah.
given actual reasons, like this is exactly why you were disqualified based on our criteria. We'll get to the criteria at the end, but I think, I would be curious to know. Buchan's been like in and then out and then in, and then he's good for one Olympics, then he's not good for the next. So I'm just very curious this time around if they actually gave him a reason. And I was also curious
Yeah.
why in 2018, what the official reasoning was that kept him out then. So,
I mean, we still don't know the official for 2018 for any of those athletes, other than we know that they were clearing athletes based on whether or not you've had any issues with doping or anything like that. And all of a sudden, a bunch of athletes weren't on it. And
right.
wasn't that the list where Stepanova was cleared to compete, but then
Yeah.
Buchan wasn't, right?
Yeah.
And so that disqualified them.
Same thing with Stolbova.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Klimov was okay. Maybe I'm wrong, but it was Stolbova that wasn't. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
as far as I know, nobody was ever given a reason why. I
Mhm.
think at one point Buchan even said as much, maybe not. But I'm just curious. I
Yeah.
really want to know if they reached out to them, if they said
My
this
bet is
is
no. My bet is they did not give any official reason because
yeah,
once you give an official reason, there's something you can argue and argue
right.
against, and it's better just to say, hey, you didn't meet the criteria.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, really quick, just basically there was no room for error. What is it? I think the federation had to submit the list of athletes, and they had to submit one athlete per discipline or a
Hmm.
team, right, for
Hmm.
pairs and ice dance, and then one substitute that would compete just in case the primary
Hmm.
athlete you submitted is injured, can't compete.
Hmm.
The biggest thing is they had to have passed extensive anti-doping drug testing starting of February this year, right? So they've been starting that process. And then their social media, their statements, news, all of that was reviewed. And I'm sure there are lots of folks out there keeping this information because, I like to say figure skating fans have long memories. But
They
if
keep
these
receipts.
skaters, yes, they do. They keep receipts, they keep
Yeah.
screenshots. Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Um, but if these athletes had said anything in support of the war in Ukraine or the invasion, if they attended any military rallies, have any direct ties to anything like these military organizations in the army, for example, you not eligible. And what we're seeing here is that in ice dance and for pairs, well, their primary entry was Mishkina Galyamov, and I know Galyamov has I've seen, photos myself of
That's what I
him
don't understand. Why would
with
they
in
submit
these,
him?
yeah. Why would you
I
submit these athletes if you know they're going to fail? Because even in his social media, he has going to these military rallies, right? He has said statements in support of the war. I actually haven't seen anything specific about Stepanova and Bukin, but their coach is one of, yes.
one that was told that he was not even going to be able to go to China in the event
Right,
that this Olympic qualifying
right.
thing would happen.
And I
So,
think you're not allowed to have any associations with coaches like that either, right? And so there's a lot of reasons here, but like you're saying, the Machine Galyamov one was obvious. They were
yeah,
never going to be approved. So why would you put them as your primary entry? I just don't get
yeah,
that logic. Make them the sub even, but they
it's
wouldn't get
strange
cleared
to
as
me. Yeah,
subs. Right. Whereas I haven't seen anything from Wojkova or Kozlowski that have been overtly pro-war or supporting the war or attending these military rallies, or I don't even think they're part of the military skating club, right? So I don't understand that one.
I saw.
With ice dance, I can see it as a mistake. Maybe they didn't think like Zulin was going to be disqualifying or something. I don't know, but
Yeah, it's what's interesting to me, and I have very many layers of thoughts about should the athletes be punished for supporting their country, and when we look at Russia, and it's a country where figure skating is the number one sport. I met people from Russia when I was in my previous career that were coming to where I live, and I live in a very touristy city, and I would always talk to them about figure skating if they said they were from Russia, and this sport is unbelievably big. The skaters,
yeah.
not even the absolute top skaters. A lot of these skaters are celebrities. They're some of the biggest celebrities in the entire country as far as athletes go, or in general, actually. And the government has a heavy hand in sports, as we know in Russia. So they're growing up in a system where they've benefited a lot from the government directly for this sport. So I have strong opinions on, can we really fault them for, supporting a system that has basically turned them into celebrities and stars in their own country? I've seen comments where people expect these skaters to just up and leave their country and start over somewhere else because it's the moral thing to do. But it's like there's so many more layers. Maybe they don't speak English well. Maybe they have an entire family that can't leave that easily. Maybe
Right.
you're throwing away your entire life that you were so good at something to now hopefully have the same opportunity somewhere else. I just don't think that's reasonable. I understand in a
And
roundabout way why they are so supportive. But as we're seeing, there's a consequence now for being so supportive, and now it's shutting you out of the Olympics. And I just want to add one thing. It's interesting how they said for so long that, oh, who cares about the Olympics? We'll have our own events. Who cares about worlds? We're better than all of them. And then Tarasova came out and said, basically, these bastards, that was her exact words, that they're not letting them into the Olympics. So it's like they don't care, they don't care, they
yes.
don't care. And now that they're not in, they care a lot. So it's
I love
interesting.
how like the parenthetical to that is these bastards that I've made millions from.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And all of those big coaches, they lived in the US throughout the 90s and
Right.
the early 2000s. So um
And
it's
they made a lot of money here.
yeah,
Don't forget that.
yeah,
Right. And they didn't go back to Russia until they could start making money in Russia.
right.
So
Exactly.
everything they say, I filter through the lens of that.
Yeah. For some of the younger ones, I really do feel bad because
Yeah.
I don't think you can expect a 17 or an 18-year-old
And
to
yeah.
really know the world so well to say this is what I should be feeling or not feeling. But like I said, they had to draw a line somewhere, and this is what they ultimately decided. And there's some skaters that have steered
Yeah.
clear of any of that drama this entire time.
Yeah, and
And
I generally agree with you when you talk about this because, my family, they're all refugees from war. And I took, what did it take for them to leave a place that our family had lived for centuries,
Mhm,
right? That literally they called home. And it literally took feeling like life and death was on the line. And that's
mhm,
what finally made them leave. But
mhm,
that's a huge thing. It's not just easy to leave your home. And
mhm,
even us here in the United States, we both live in Florida. I'm sure you know folks who've left the state. I know folks who left the state, but I'm someone who has chosen to stay and try to make things here better. And
mhm,
and I fought for that. And
mhm.
I totally understand why it's hard to leave. It's not an easy choice. It's easy for me to tell you, you should leave your home that you've known in hope of someplace else will accept you, even though there's no guarantee that any other country will take you.
But listen, on top of all of that, that's one thing,
Yeah,
but then you're making a lot of money from this
that
sport
too.
because it is the biggest sport in the country, and now they want you to just up and leave to go somewhere else. Even if you go to the United States, you're not going to have the opportunities. So some
And
fans can say, "Wow, you did the moral thing, but now you have no career." Like
and
it's
Russian culture is really different than American in that they're expected to take care of their families.
right,
And oftentimes, a lot of these skaters, they don't come from money. They're the most successful person that their family has ever seen.
right, right.
And they're expected to take care of everybody. And that's not
Yeah, you
just
you you
immediate
look at
family. Sometimes it's cousins, it's grandparents
yeah.
too. Yeah, it's
Yagudin was living in a like a one-bedroom apartment with his mom when he was, I think even when he won Worlds in 98, it was still in that kind of situation.
oh
These
yeah.
people are coming from like nothing and then they really build themselves up into
Mm.
something, and they do become the supporters of the family. And then you think, well, if not everyone can flee the country to go where all the fans want them to go, then you are leaving. And now what about your family that is staying, you
And
know?
and I'm not saying that like I don't think I'm not saying it this way. I'm gonna go ahead and speak for you because I know you don't think this way. And if you disagree, just say something. But this is in no defense at all of any actions Russia has taken. I still think they are rightly banned from competition. Remember, this is the IOC creating rules to get these athletes back into the Olympics. Officially for the ISU, they're still banned, and I still agree
Hmm.
with that. I don't
Hmm.
think Russia or Belarus should be back in ISU competition. And I said this at Worlds. Figure skating is so much more joyful these days. These last 4 years, I have enjoyed figure skating on a level that wasn't there before. The level of camaraderie and just how much the athletes just enjoy being around each other, it just didn't exist before the ban. And whether I'm not going to place any blame on that, but I love the way it is now. Sorry.
Yeah, everyone is like best friends now. And if
Yeah,
you grew up in our generation of figure skating and you had all these fluff pieces and these profiles on skaters, and you kind of get, one of my
Oh, the
favorite
90s
skaters.
ones were the
Well, like, yeah,
best.
you
Oh,
have
the one about
Maria.
or enacting getting pushed down the stairs. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, and
stuff is
well,
crazy.
you have the Grishuk one where she thinks she is Marilyn Monroe. You just so much variety of this. But Maria Butirskaya was one of she probably is my favorite skater of all time. And I remember other skaters would consistently say, "I'm afraid of her. She is terrifying in competition. She is intense to the next level. I don't want to be in her way on the ice." Johnny Weir at one point when he did his first set of internationals, I remember it was either Blades Nice or International Figure Skating Magazine, whatever. I subscribed to both when I was a kid, but there was a quote from him, I think at Goodwill Games in 2001, and he's like, "I saw her in the hallway, and she's absolutely terrifying." So back then, when we don't have these profiles, these Facebooks and these Instagram profiles to really get to know these skaters off the ice, what you read and what you hear is what you assume. So you think everyone hates each other, and you think there's all this extra drama. But now, and especially these days, I feel like even yes, in the last Olympic cycle, you really see that everyone is so
Yeah.
supportive of each other and rooting for each other very genuinely. And I saw Lucas Britschke, just to mention one person, after he won Europeans, he had that injury, and it was like every single skater that was preparing for Worlds or posting some kind of anything, he was in the comments being so supportive to every single one of them, So I feel like he's not the only
Yeah.
one by far, but I noticed that someone would post something, I would always see his name in the comments, and I thought, wow, like you get this inside view on skaters that you didn't get in our generation. So they
Oh,
can't write these
right.
dramas that there don't
It's
exist.
when you talked about Butirskaya, the first anecdote that came into my head was the mob blew up her car.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's to me everything Butirskaya. Yeah, I can see to where she's scary in
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I'd be afraid of somebody who lives that life too.
Yeah.
Now that we're considering who's not making it for, pairs or ice dance from Russia now because no one qualified.
Mhm.
We had mentioned how for a lot of teams, there's a huge size of relief. When that list came out, everyone knew that if a Russian pair or a Russian ice dance couple entered the qualifying competition, they would take a spot. And now that
Yeah.
one more spot is up for grabs. And in a field like pairs, what is it, three for grabs?
Three. Yeah.
Those were very precious spots
Yeah.
and huge size of relief. It opens up a lot of doors. But let's just talk about dance, I guess, first, because
Okay.
I guess I always want to talk about ice dance.
Okay.
Yeah, so we knew that the Lithuanians were going to make it, Reed and Ambrulevičius, freak fall
Yeah.
in the rhythm dance. And it was just so punishing these days to qualify in the free at Worlds if you have one mistake, two Worlds in a row where this has happened to teams. Um, and the other team that really missed out were Harris and Chan. But, it's kind of up in the air depending on who goes of whether they can really make it. I don't know what you think about that.
I would say, Harris and Chan are in a tough position. I think that if you look at the fact that they made the free dance at Worlds, you would think, okay, they're probably in line for the second spot behind the Lithuanians. But I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a toss up for me. You have the world junior champions, Tali and Lafornia from Italy, who were scoring massively in
Mm.
junior events this year. So many people commented that they looked like they were a senior team. As far as I know, he is either already okay to get citizenship or he's on track to do so. So I think that in any event, they could still be sent to this competition, and if they score well enough, they could get a spot either for themselves or somebody else. But I think that they have to be considered as even coming straight into seniors. They've never skated seniors before. I think that they would be looked at as potentially favorites. Um,
So he doesn't have citizenship yet. And Italy just passed a more restrictive
He's
citizenship
before that.
law.
He's before
Okay,
that
he
though.
got grandfathered in. Okay.
As long as yeah, so as long as you started your paperwork before that, then you should be okay. And this is again, I haven't done the research. I don't believe he has it yet, but he's in process to have it. That's what I understand. Um, and then so I would consider that they, especially, the Olympics are in Italy. I'm sure that this team is going to come in with very strong content that gets them potentially into the Olympics. Um, and then I would say Also, the Japanese team, Yoshida and Morita, I think so many people are impressed with them. I'm really impressed. Their step up from juniors to
Yeah.
seniors. I think that they will qualify as well. And they were really close
Yeah.
at
They
Worlds. I think they
were.
were like
They were.
21st or 22nd or something.
They're
Um,
22nd, and they were literally like, oh, point 0.4, so 0.41
yeah,
points away
yeah.
from qualifying for the
And there's
free.
two, remember, there's two segments. So we'll
Yeah.
talk about this, and this is going to help one of the pairs teams tremendously that there's no one's getting cut after the rhythm dance. You're doing a free dance as well, so you're getting those points.
Yeah.
So I think them. So we have the Lithuanians, the Italians. I would say the Japanese team, and then most likely I would say probably the Australians. They have Ice Academy Montreal on their
Yeah.
side.
But
So
one thing to watch though for, I remember watching that 4 years ago, and the way it was set up, or the way it was scored anyway, it was so skate order and by group. And
hmm
literally, there were 5 spots up for grabs last time. And then once the final group took the ice of all 5 teams, the PCS just drastically increased for all 5 of these teams.
hmm
And so the skate order basically in ice dance decided who got to go to the Olympics just by the virtue of the PCS was just all skate order. They
yeah.
weren't truly evaluating each team. And so I think for dance, the rhythm dance, even though you get to have both phases, it's still going to be really,
hmm
really important.
But does it ever matter? Like it's always kind of skate order that we see these
Yeah,
GOEs and these
okay,
PCS
more
going
or
up.
less.
Yeah, I mean that's
But a
nothing new.
mistake, like, yeah, a small
Yeah,
mistake that gets you out of the final group
yeah,
could really, really set you back and make it a
yeah.
hard, yeah, hill to overcome.
I mean I think that there's other teams looking in. I really like the Hungarian team.
Mm.
They qualified for the free dance at Worlds 2 years ago, or not this year, I think actually probably 3 years ago now. I think it was 2023 if we're looking at this being the new season already. Um, they're under Barbara Fuster-Poli's team as well, so I guess they could have strong content. They could be in contention as well. Susis and Furious of Ireland, I don't know. You look at how they were previous four continents medalist in an
They're not.
Olympic year given, but they were also I think they were as high as like 13th or something at Worlds way back when. I don't. Well, also, you know what? They're not even in contention to go to the Olympics, so I don't even know that they're going to go to
Yeah, because they can't get
Beijing.
yeah, there's no
Yeah,
citizenship
yeah.
possible, right? Okay.
Yeah. So, so yeah, I would say those probably there's five teams. I don't know of any surprise team that's going to come out of nowhere. Like
Yeah.
Georgia could technically send a second team now, and I don't know of anybody that's
Don't
there
worry.
to do
And
so.
that's the thing to look for because I think you're right. It does look like these are the t teams going now that there's no Russian team that's going to qualify. But yeah, you're right. A Georgian team could pop up, or
Mhm.
a formerly ex now Georgian team could pop up. Right.
Mhm.
Any other country that can qualify a second spot based on
No,
worlds? I don't think so.
no.
Just Georgia. Yeah. Right. And so that,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see. Let's
So
see.
we'll talk about pairs now. This is the one that's just I feel bad. It's already you have so many decent level teams, and now you're taking three more teams for a total of 19. So there's a confusion, there's an uncertainty over what's going on with Sui, whether she is still with the partner she was showing on social media, this new project that she has for 2026 Olympics. Apparently, I've read that he is probably slash possibly suspended by the Chinese Federation for, I think, inappropriate texts.
Oh,
Yeah, so that's what the rumor is. And then the question is, well, this Russian journalist said that another team is coming back. So now is Sui coming back actually with Han? And is this the big comeback that's happening? Wouldn't honestly be that surprised if that is the case.
interesting.
But even so, I feel like let's just hypothetically say it's Sui and Han. So they could start training a week before and they're gonna get an Olympic spot, I'm pretty sure. So that would be one team pretty much given. Um, the American team, it's interesting because I think Chan and Hao are kind of a question mark whether they're healthy or not. Um, I wouldn't, Plazas and Fernandez, who were at Worlds 2 years ago, they've been injured. I think they're back now. You have McBeath and Parkman, who've had really hot or cold results. I wouldn't say that they're really the most consistent team. any of them, I mean, you could send them. I don't think it's considering that there's only three teams, it might be a little bit of a gamble, I think, to get that
It
third
really
spot.
is. And I wonder if they'll do some type of like pre-thing other than
Of
like a
course,
chance
like,
camp
well,
monitoring to see who gets to go to this. Because, and just as a reminder, Efimova and Mitrofanov, Cam and O'Shea, they can't go and qualify this spot because they qualified spots at
right,
Worlds. And so it has to be different teams.
right.
And so even if Efimova and Mitrofanov can't use any of the Olympic spots, they still have to, it doesn't matter, right?
Well, also
So,
consider this, like think about it that there might be a team that goes and doesn't qualify the spot, but then they end up going to the Olympics anyways because
right,
FMOVA can't go anyway. So there's a lot here, there's
there is.
it's there's four teams that could potentially go, but I don't think any of them are like, yes, they will definitely qualify. So that'll be interesting. I know that there's the John Nix competition, but I feel like that's probably after this competition. Maybe not. I'm not sure. But there's going to have to be some
Yeah.
kind of monitoring event before or just summer whatever monitoring to decide who is the strongest to go. I would have assumed it was Chen and Hao, but I don't know that he's even skating right now. So
Oh, really?
yeah, I'm not
Like,
sure. So yeah, they were a little rough last year. And okay, so you have Sweden and partner, we'll say, because we don't know who. But then you have Nagaoka and Moriguchi from Japan, and this team, they had a
they're still
disastrous
good.
Worlds. Okay, this twist was a disaster. I said in practice they're gonna mess it up in competition. They had a massive mistake in competition, but the thing is, they were scoring. They were third in the free skate, I think, at Finlandia, the Grand Prix this year. Their scores are high because their technical elements are just so
Yeah,
good and so above everybody else. And like I said, you have a short program and a free skate. Mess up the short program, they could jump their way into a top three position in the free skate, I think, pretty comfortably, as long as they're somewhat on.
they're so talented. They just skate so fast. It's a lot of that, like what you see with the Young Goose Academy teams, where they're really just high risk takers, especially with the lifts.
Yeah.
And that's where you really are going to see them rack up these
Oh,
points. So I agree with you. I think they're pretty much a shoe-in if they skate relatively clean.
they are
Because,
fearless. Their
hmm
PCS should be, I know they're
I agree.
sloppy, but the thing is that speed has to account for something. Those lifts literally like cover the ice like nothing I've ever seen. There's no hesitation going into the jumps. I mean, this is if they're on, they are going to score
Yep,
well into the 120s. If they're clean, they're going to be in the 130s. Like I assure
I
you,
agree.
they're the level of a team. So definitely they would be their potential tells me that they would probably be honestly even more of a chance than whatever American team goes at this point, in my opinion.
I agree
Um,
because all the American teams are a mixed bag, and it's not like they've shown us any type of real consistency or even high potential other than Chen and Hao. Chen and Hao's to me the highest potential of our
mhm,
other teams aside from the two that qualified spots at Worlds.
mhm.
But even then, the injury has just made it so just such an unknown, right?
Yeah. One team that actually was announced as having been released by Russia today is Akapova and Rachmanin. They're a team that have been together for quite some time. I believe at the last Russian National Olympic trial in 2022, I think they were like fifth or sixth place. So they were right behind all these big teams. Remember, Russia was three of the top four spots at the last Olympics. So you have to consider that this team is probably going to be in contention for one of those spots as well. I don't see that. I mean, if they're anything at the level of typical Russians, then I would assume that they would also be high up on that qualifying list. So with that in mind, it's the big
Right.
question is still Sui and what's going to happen with China. But I would say if she comes back, especially with Han, that's a given spot. Japanese team, unless they're a complete disaster, I would say that is a spot for them. And then I would say probably the Armenians, the Russians, but the new Armenians would probably be there. And then whatever American team goes would just have to be really, really, really on top of their game. They would really, this
Right.
is,
And
this,
already that's four teams, three spots.
yeah, yeah.
And it's like if a Russian team competed, you're
Oh,
looking
yeah,
at four
yeah,
teams for two spots.
yeah,
And so that would have been way worse.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
and
there's the
then
Kovalevs who didn't
yeah,
qualify for the free, but they're not going to qualify here. Not
no,
with
they won't
these
qualify.
teams. They're not.
No,
No.
they'll get the quota spot because France will. France is one of those very few countries that at least has three spots out of the four qualified for the Olympics, and they're potentially in it to get into the free skate in the team event. So I would say the Kovalevs would get a quota spot, one of those quota spots. Now, curiously, I haven't seen anything, and it would require a release from Russia, and they usually make a big deal about this when this happens. But Georgia could technically send a second team. Uzbekistan could technically send a second team. I'm wondering, I mean, I think it would have been announced with this release to Armenia, but I'm wondering if there's these other teams being secretly put into these other federations and we don't really know about it yet because
Right.
Uzbekistan team, this is their first year that they competed outside of Russia and they're already top 10 at Worlds. The Georgians are, potentially looking at a run at an Olympic medal, so they could technically send a second team. But we haven't heard anything, so I don't know if there's anything brewing there or not.
And I was curious about that too, because I know right before the ban, there were a lot of up and coming Russian pairs, right behind Machina Galyamov and Voykova and Koslowski, like doing stuff like triple Lutz, half loop, triple saw cow combinations, things like that, right? Literally just crazy technical content out there. So there's a lot. There's like a lot of potential teams that we never really saw have a lot of success, but had a lot of potential too. So I'm really curious about that if any actually do make their way to Georgia considering this, because that
Mhm.
spot's there. I'm sure the Georgian Federation is happy to welcome a new pair
Yes, yes.
and dance team.
For sure. Yeah. And
New.
they're looking at making a run at an Olympic bronze medal in the team
Right.
competition as well. So I think the more the merrier for them, and they want to build up this very strong federation. So I would be very surprised if they didn't have something in the works. I just don't, I would assume by now we would have heard about a release or whatever. So just something to keep in mind if we look at the rosters and we all of a sudden see this Georgian team that we've never heard of. This is what
Well,
is
in the next three
really
months, we
happening.
may hear about a new team that all of a sudden is going to come out and we'll see them in China to
Yeah.
qualify a spot. I
Yeah.
expect at least one. Be crazy. All these potential spots that at least they weren't trying to fill them. So we'll see.
And also I'm thinking about it right now, and we didn't even think about this, but the North Koreans did not get sent to Worlds. And in
Although
the
they have a pair,
past,
and they
yeah,
have a pretty
that's
good pair. That's
but
right.
they can't be sent to China now, so that's a definite no.
Why can't they be sent to China?
I would not. I mean, I don't think North Korea is going to send their team to China. I don't know if
I
China's
was
going to
curious.
allow them to be there.
Okay.
But that I mean that would be another one. It's the same girl that was really making progress as a pair skater back. I think it was already 2018 at this point. She was skating with Bruno Marcotte and Megan Duhamel's camp. Uh, and they were, I believe, they were like just outside the top 10 at the Olympics. But she's with a new partner now. I think they
Oh, okay.
competed internationally a few times early last year. Thought they would be sent to Worlds. Typically, North Korean skaters have been sent to Worlds in the
But it
pre-Olympic.
was in the US, so maybe
Yeah, so
that's
I don't know.
probably
Maybe they're
why.
just stuck,
Yeah.
yeah. But I just thought about that we did not see any of those skaters, and I don't expect them to show up in China. Okay, so let's go back now to the skaters that actually are on this list that are going to the Olympic qualifying event and what we think their chances are. Let's start with Petrosian, Adelia Petrosian. She has a triple axel, she has a quad toe. She's going to qualify, I would
Yeah, I
say.
agree. Yeah.
Um, she's been working her way up, producing really consistent results in Russia domestically. Won the recent Grand Prix final of Russia that I spoke about a little bit earlier. They have their own circuit now. Um, I had to actually familiarize myself with her skating because, like I said, I haven't been following. And not surprisingly, she skates very much like a Tuperidze
Yeah.
skater, just very kind of I've said it for so long, but it's to me like paint by numbers, and I don't know how else to describe it. It's very like you go from one element to the next, and the movements all have to be very much the same, and there's never any thought process to make this your own type of deal. And I
Right.
feel that in her skating. Um, but it's every one of their skaters just plow through their programs with this choreography, and it's like there's no breathing room to really get into the program, at least for me.
And you see it in their practices with Tutberidze skaters a lot. When they're doing a quad toe, they practice the quad toe one way. And it's with all this choreography, transitions, all that, but they're not even practicing it in isolation in any other way. You're
Mhm.
learning it with the transitions and choreography. And so
Mhm.
that's why it does feel formulaic because it is
Mhm.
formulaic. It's
Mhm.
just literally how they're learning the element and it's part of the practice.
Mhm.
So I can see that. Like, and you're talking about a two-breed skater. Yeah, literally every jump flaw you can think of a two-breed skater, she has for the most
Mhm.
part. That quad toe, I literally just want to do
Pre-rotated?
this. Air quotes again. Yeah, tons
Yeah.
of pre-rotation. I'm just like
Yeah.
Amber Corwin. I just want to go
Yeah.
put a crown on her or a tiara or something. That's what it really felt
Yeah, and
like.
for people that don't understand this, it's not that we're just picking on this because someone's going to come in and say, "Oh, the jumps need pre-rotation, blah blah blah." But
Not
if
this
you look
level
at her
though.
exactly, if you look at I watched her Russian Nationals free skate and I believe it was her first quad that she did. They showed in slow motion. That toe pick is turning almost a full rotation on the ice before she actually goes up into the air. And this has been consistently a problem with Tutberidze skaters. And it's not only that camp that has this problem. Skaters that are trying the more difficult jumps, they tend to really force it. And this is just extreme levels of pre-rotation. The problem is that unless it's called in real time, the way that the judging is, the way that the technical panel is, unless they call it in real time without the cameras, without the review, you can't really do anything about it. And then the judges are stuck in a position where why would I deduct for it if it wasn't called? So I'm
Right.
just going to give it a +5 DOE. And that's what ends up happening, even
And they're
though
supposed
she's,
to, though.
yeah,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
supposed to deduct for the pre-rotation, but there's no official way of the technical panel to say this jump was
yeah,
pre-rotated,
yeah,
so judges just ignore that. Yeah.
right. And then if you look at it, she's like a quarter turn short, which is also a common thing in women's skating in general. But if you take into account the almost full rotation on the ice before she goes up, and then the quarter before, she's realistically doing less rotations off the ice than somebody that does a clean triple toe. And I've said this
Yep.
for so long. This is also Shoma Uno was notorious for this as well with his quad loop. He was doing less rotations than someone that does a beautiful clean triple loop on his quad loop. And this is the for me, she can clean up her technique, she can get stronger. I don't know that that's going to happen, but it's I will be curious to see if Russia coming back in, like you said, this is not an ISU thing, this is an IOC thing. You now don't have this panel where previously Azerbaijan and Armenia and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and all these countries, even Ukraine, used to all be on the pro-Russia side. You don't have them anymore as this boost, and you don't have the technical panelists that really are like, ooh, rah rah
Right.
Russias. So I'll be
And
curious
there's
to see if
no
they're
automatic
harsh.
reputation points
Yeah,
anymore. And I
yeah,
want, and there used to be that whole Tutberidze scoring bonus.
right.
Even Kosternaya talked about it and how when she
Mhm.
left, all of a sudden her PCS went down.
Yeah,
I mean, her skating got worse too, but that's another story.
yeah.
But I'll be curious to see that, especially when coming out here. Does she score sevens or does she score eights?
Hmm.
And let's say this was 4 years ago, a brand new team Tuparitsi skater is getting eights in PCS.
Right.
Whereas now, I think we might see her just get stuck in the sevens. And if she is, we'll
But that
talk
would be
about
fair.
impact.
That's
Yeah, it would be.
fair.
Considering watching the skating is fair. Very.
You look at Samodelkina, who I really like, and she's being resorted to these lower scores right
Yeah.
now. I don't see how you can throw a Russian in that's really her. It's interesting with Tutberidze skaters, and I would love to sit in on a practice session of hers just to see how she teaches these triple
Yeah.
combinations because that jolting, resetting in between the two jumps, it's apparent with every single one of her skaters. And it's like they land the jump, they have to completely reset, like readjust their body in between, and then they go to pull back for the triple toe. A lot of Petrosian's jumps are really, really muscled and forced and really jabbed into the
Yep.
ice, and it's a lot of what we've seen. It's not every skater. I mean, you talk about Kosternaya, she had really easy, effortless jumping.
But
But with a
learned
lot of
all of
hers,
her jumps and
yeah,
technique before she got
yeah,
to Team
exactly.
Tuparitsi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just be interested to see how this triple triple always ends up looking off balance the same.
Right.
As with most of
You
the
know, and the GOE too on the jumps. We were used to seeing her skaters get +3, +4 on these jumps, even if they had all this pre-rotation, they were cheated,
Mhm.
bad edges,
Mhm.
whatever. Are
Mhm.
we still going to see that? Or are we going to see like the +1s, +2s, like should have
More
been,
realistic.
yeah, more
Yeah.
realistic? That'll be interesting too, because we'll talk about chances at the Olympics, but that it'll tell us a
Mhm.
lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So Petrosian is the women's entry to the qualifying competition. Like we said, she's going to make it. I don't see how she doesn't make it. Peter Gumennik, he's kind of the opposite. He's really it's like he went from this young, very proper skater in the juniors. Now he's a little bit of a hippie, it looks like to me. But his skating is very, very solid. And you
Yeah, it is.
actually I see the quality of his air position and the running edge he has on some of the landings. It reminds me of Mikhail Kolyada, and Kolyada is one of my absolute favorite skaters from Russia ever. And he has a lot of those. He leans more on the side of these really nice qualities as opposed to some of the other Russian skaters we've seen lately, especially in the men's event, that just after a minute and a half or 2 minutes, they lose all speed, all steam. They're doing nothing in the
Right.
program. They're crawling on these. He is very much the opposite. He's an artistic skater. He holds his positions. He has a multitude of quads that are all huge. I watched I think it was his nationals programs, but his free skate, the jumps were massive. So I was very impressed in the improvement that he's made, and it seems like in the last 2 years or so, he's really put himself up into contention. He was one of
Yeah,
those skaters. I think he was bronze medalist at the Junior Worlds that happened literally right before COVID started, and then I think we maybe saw him at one Grand Prix event at some point, and that was
yeah.
it.
Because and
So,
he's the only one of this group that we've seen, and he was always
mhm,
in that mix with like Semenenko, Kondratyuk, and everything, and he just never made it past, right?
mhm,
And now we're seeing him. Now that we haven't seen him, he's had all this growth. Because I was seeing like, oh, he's quad flip and quad lutz now. He did not
mhm.
have those before. I
Right,
think it was
right.
just saw and toe before. Did he even have a toe? I don't even remember.
I don't know.
Um, Yeah, and so like yeah, he's somebody I saw that name and I was like, "Oh, I'd be interested in watching him again because he was really good just for that." He was that just kind of different, artistic, not quite the whole
Hmm.
at not mainstream whatever, but he did stick out of the pack in my opinion, You
Hmm.
had Kontrakchuk who was a theater kid, but then you had Gumennik who was this actual more classic Russian skater who I guess
Hmm.
now is all a hippie, but
Yeah, I remember the kind of the chatter online the night of the announcement that someone on the Russian team had tested positive for drugs. Almost instantly, one of these theories that was out in the open, and so many people were like, "Yeah, I could see it," was that Kondratyuk tested positive for weed. That was the theory
I
being thrown
know. It
around.
was
That
so
whole
believable. I remember hearing that and being like, "Oh, of course he did. Of course he did. Whatever."
Yeah, so not quite the story, but yeah, I think he's always been a little bit of that artiste hipster type of style. So those are the two for Russia. In all honesty, the man from Belarus, I know nothing about him. I don't
Yeah.
know if he has a chance or not. I would say probably not, just based on where the rest of the men are and what this level of competition is going to be. But as far as the women go, Victoria Stefanova was actually 12th at the Olympics in 2022, kind of quietly. Like I had to look it up and I was like, I don't remember that exactly. She was in the top 10 at Europeans. I have read that she's been practicing and even landing the quad loop at some point. I looked at her protocol
Oh
for
wow.
nationals this year, which really means nothing. It's Belarusian nationals. They can do whatever they want,
Right.
but it's very good. So I would say she is potentially, if she's kept up her level and she was 12th at the Olympics last time around, I would say she's definitely in very good contention to take a spot again this year.
Yeah. And there's 5 spots. You know, and you just going into that really quick. Like there are 5 spots, and I see her as taking one too. I
Mhm.
do feel like she's pretty safe, and I agree with you. Never heard of the Belarusian man. But I don't even know if he has consistent quads, does he?
I have no idea.
Yeah, see, no idea, right? So it's kind of like just up in the air for that.
He'll be like the
My
North
guess is
Korean man
no.
in Beijing. Like he will literally be this one that shows up out of nowhere and probably has a quad toe because that's happened with the North Korean men. These guys have never competed ever before, and they show up with a quad toe. So we'll see. I mean, it's in the back of my mind. I'm gonna
Yeah.
say, well, I wrote him off, but you never know.
Yeah, but
But yeah.
there's two subs though too in case,
Mhm.
either Gumennik or Petrosian get injured. And so for the women, I Gorbacheva, I hadn't seen her before, but she has a quad. So I would say she would qualify too if needed. If she needs to compete, yeah.
I don't, unless Petrosian gets some serious injury, I don't see them
Yeah, I
straying
don't see
away
that
from
happening.
that.
Yeah.
But I do
Good.
say, so that one, Petrosian was like for sure, I would say that's a given. But I was very interested that they chose Gumennik over Vladislav Dzitsky because, like I said when we started this whole thing, he has a quad axle and he's landed it. And
Mm,
he actually, if you're looking comparatively, he was the national champion this year. I think if you look back at last year, he was maybe second place. Gumennik was only like fifth at nationals this year. He ended up winning the Russian Cup final or whatever, one of those things, like one competition. But if you're looking head to head, I'm very surprised that they went with Gumennik. Maybe they thought he was the safer bet. I'm not really sure. But as far as making a storyline, I would think you would go with the one that has the quad axle.
right.
But we're speaking about how Gumennik is the exact opposite of what we've come to know from so many Russian skaters, and
And
Vladislav
Ziki,
is
it's
kind of this way.
very typical.
Yeah,
I was literally just like, it's Igniatov, but with the quad axle or
yeah,
better quads. I'm just
yeah.
like, oh, toward the end, I'm just like, oh dear, I just want to turn this off. If not for the fact that like I had to start understanding what his skating was like, I'd be like, I'm done. I'm gonna go get a break or something. Like
I
it
mean,
was just not much there at all.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Gumennik is definitely the more well-rounded skater.
Mhm. And it's not like more well-rounded in like, oh no, he only has up to a quad lutz. Like, it's not even like,
Yeah.
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 So we'll see those most likely we'll see those two. I think that they'll both come away with spots for what are they
Yeah.
calling them? I don't even know.
They're
Neutral
calling them the neutral
athletes?
athletes. Neutral
Yeah, okay.
athletes.
So
Yes.
neutral athletes, they'll probably have
Hmm.
some Olympic flag or something next to their names. Um, with that in mind, let's now go into the men and the women's competitions at the qualifying event, and let's talk about who we think for these five spots for each discipline, who we think are in contention. Starting with the men, I think it's more wide open here. Gumennik, obviously, with all these quads, he can make it probably several mistakes and easily qualify still.
Right.
So there's one. Um, one of the Koreans, I would say, dependent on which one it is. I mean, one got injured this year, so the other one ended up going to Worlds, had the skate of his life at four continents. So I think either of the Koreans would be in pretty good shape to also qualify, and then that opens the door for them to get into the team competition as well. Um, one of the Israelis, I would say Lev Vinokur would get the nod just because he's up and coming. He has quads. Mark Gordnitsky was very consistent for a long time, but he's kind of stuck on that triple axle level of everything.
Yeah.
Um, but either one going probably has a fair shot. I just think Lev is probably
Yeah.
with a higher
He is the
potential.
future too for
Yeah.
Israeli skating. He
Yeah.
would be able to make that next level, whereas I agree with you, Gordonitsky is just plateaued.
And then so if I had to guess, probably those would be the three front runners. And then you have probably three or four more skaters fighting it out for those last three spots. Whatever Frenchman goes, it's really kind of up in the air. It's the story of French
Right.
skating,
Roll the
but
dice, right?
it
Any
will
of them.
be Luc Economides or it will be Francois Pitot. One of those two most likely will be the one that goes. And they've had moments of brilliance and they've had moments of not so great skating. So they're a question mark. You have the Armenian Semen Danielants who qualified for the free skate at his first Worlds last year, had a disaster skate in the short program this year at Worlds, but he has the technical goods to jump his
Yeah.
way probably into a spot as well. And then there's also for an up skater that's jumping up into the senior ranks for next year, Genrik Gartung, who has landed multiple quads in his free skate before. I don't think that he has the PCS at all yet, at least, as of this year. But those quads will go a long way in a competition where so many of the skaters will most likely be inconsistent.
And
So I would say he would be the one sent and not Nikita
over steroids,
Petrosian.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And he's the
So
one we're all used to seeing the last 4 years. So that's
yeah,
going to be a big surprise to fans if he ends up going to the qualifying
yeah.
competition. Yeah.
Yeah. So those would be I don't know. I don't there might be again there might be some skater somewhere that's we talk about Georgia again. They potentially would have a second spot for a skater. They don't have any age eligible skaters, but who's to say there won't be one that just pops up?
Right.
So that could be another one. Other
Donovan
than that
too
though,
has
well,
to qualify a
Donovan,
spot,
yeah,
and
Donovan,
he'll
the
try.
problem, he will try and he will get really high PCS for what he puts out there. I felt like for a bit his skating looked like it was progressing, but this year, I don't know. I felt like it was taking a step back. He's really going full force into these quad salchows. Triple axle looks better, I will say. He used to really kill the speed going into it. It looks better now, but he's just so wildly inconsistent that if he would really need to skate well and then have that PCS, probably it will be higher than a lot of the other skaters just because he's so fan favorite and his programs are geared towards having so much energy. I would say he's still yeah, a lot can change during the summer, but I didn't see anything this year watching him in practices both at Skate
Yeah.
America and Worlds. I wouldn't say that I would be comfortable saying he's one of those favorites.
Yeah.
But you never
The
know.
only thing, yeah, because it being a September competition, there's going to be a lot of variables.
Hmm.
I think you could see him get that like fifth place final spot just for that if he skates
Hmm.
well, and just
Hmm.
some of these other teams in the mix for those final-ish spots just don't.
Hmm.
Or skaters, not teams. I mean, sorry. Always talking about
And
ice dance.
yeah, no, I know. Always I stance minded. For the women, you have Petrosian, who, like I said,
Yeah, for
she would
sure.
have to skate really poorly to not qualify. You also have Luna Hendricks that has to do this competition. I don't know what her status is. As far as I know, it doesn't look like she's back to 100% yet either. And even if she's at like 70 or 80%, I think she could still qualify just based on she used to do three or four triple programs and score like almost 140. So
Oh,
I I
brutalized.
I think that she's comfortably there as long as she's healthy. If not, they would send Jade Hoving, and then I don't
Yeah,
think
that's not. And
that's
I really hope that Hendricks is healthy enough to compete in September. I do not want a situation to where Hendricks can't compete in September. They
and
send
then she
someone
takes the
else,
spot.
and then she takes a spot in the Olympics. I'm like, absolutely not. That's something where if Nina makes a deal and makes a fuss, because she would, I'd be right there with her, and I'm sure most of the
Yeah,
fans would too. Like,
yeah.
no, she earned that spot,
And Nina, like I
100%.
said, she had two of my absolute favorite programs this year. I think she is a stunning skater. So
Hmm.
I want her spot to be her spot. And
Right.
Luna,
And she was
get
seventh at
healthy by September.
Worlds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
and if we're honestly talking about Lona skating, that's where she should end up being too.
Man.
Like a typical Lona program, I would have placed her, just looking at this now, below Wakaba for sure. Definitely. I prefer Nina over her these
Yeah.
days too, just for
Yeah.
quality of the skating. Anyway,
So yeah, if she shows up though, and like I said, she's even at half of what she usually is. I think
yeah.
she's getting a spot. Gubanova, of course,
Yeah,
Anastasia
I think so.
Gubanova for sure. We saw how she skated at World Team Trophy. If she skates like that in the Olympics, she's putting herself in contention for a medal. Honestly, she can put herself in that final group and she can make things interesting if she repeats. So she had
Right.
that terrible short program at World. She's another one. You now have a free skate that you can catch back up. And so I don't see her bombing both programs. She's probably in there for sure. Safanova, like I said, from Belarus, she was 12th at the last Olympics. It looks to me like she's kept up her level. Her protocols look strong. Can't really find coverage from Belarusian nationals on YouTube,
I know,
so I'm just
right?
going by what the protocol says. But it looks like she's pretty strong. And then on from China, who was everybody's next big hope, she also had that disaster skate at Worlds. So I think if she's back to her normal, then she would qualify a spot. I think that's the likely five. If Hendricks isn't healthy, then it makes things a little bit more interesting. Maybe someone like Talia Guard sneaks in there. I don't know. It would require quite a bit for her to get in,
Yeah.
I think. But we'll see. I think that this is I think Hendricks will make the effort to go to Beijing anyways, and that would likely be the
And
five.
And the women's is way more straightforward because there's no countries with a weird situation to where they qualified 2 spots for Worlds, but only one for the Olympics,
Hmm.
right? So everything's just this is it. Whoever
Hmm.
shows up, that's it. There could be no surprise new Georgian skaters, for example, popping up and coming. So like, yeah.
Right. So now let's talk about the Olympic impact with the
Oh
assumption
my
that
God.
these Russian skaters will get in, and we're again going to go with Gumennik and Petrosian because these are the chosen ones. Uh, for the men, it's a very interesting situation in the men's field, I think, because you have now, I think you have a very clear top four, but they're so inconsistent. And then you have anyone in the top 10 that could really sneak in. So you have
Mhm.
Malinin, you have Shidorov, Kageyama, and you have Adam Siahinfav. Those are,
I would agree.
if they skate
Mhm.
very, very well, they would be the top four. But then you have someone like Kevin Amos that's always like nipping right there. If he's clean, he just needs one more mistake most of the time from somebody, and he's on the podium. You have Jason Brown, who showed he could potentially be on the podium with no quads. You have skaters like the Italians that could have the skate of their lives. There's quite a few skaters that could jump up there. You have Cal Mura, who could potentially get back into
Right.
the world scene for Japan, who has a huge potential. Shun Sato, you have all these skaters that are right behind. I think Gumennik is an interesting one because I can't really fault his PCS to dump it down low.
Right. Mhm.
He, with all these quads that he has, and the quality of the jumps and the quality of his overall skating and the attention to the program, I would say he would be a dark horse to potentially, much like Kevin Amos, but with a higher technical um
Cushion in a
ceiling.
way.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. He could potentially be in there for a medal just like any of the other ones. It's really it's it's
Yeah,
such
I
a
agree with
depth
you.
that it's like anyone makes a mistake and anyone can sneak in there.
And it really is to me when he comes back. Are we going to see sevens in PCS or are we going to see eights? If we see eights, then yeah, I agree with you. He's probably right there with that group hunting for a medal. And I'm still kind of in my brain, it's going to tell me a lot of whether he's with that primary top four that are fighting for the podium or
Hmm.
with he's that group right under waiting to take advantage.
Hmm.
My gut right now is he's part of the group waiting to take advantage. But if his PCS comes out in this competition, it's eights, he could just be part of the regular medal hunt.
Yeah,
He's
you
that
look at
good. He's that good.
Shidorov. Yeah, I mean Shidorov. I know he's everybody's new favorite, but he really, we talked about it overall. He doesn't really have a program.
No, he
He
doesn't.
and so if and he does have this crazy technical whatever. But if you're looking at the quality of the overall skating, it would definitely be Gumennik who's better. So I
I
again,
agree.
this is an IOC thing that is bringing these athletes in, not the ISU, and I will be very curious to see if the scores are reality based or if they're, I would say, safe
Politically based.
or politically. Yeah,
Right.
I don't know. It'll be
There's a lot.
interesting.
And it'll also be interesting to see which judges get sent to this competition because they don't need to be ISU level, right? They just need to be, or sorry, they don't need to be ISU championship level. They can just be international level, I think. And so you're not even getting like the most experienced, whatever judges. You could just be
Right.
getting some random judge who just qualified this year to become an
Yeah.
international judge. And I'm doing the senior Bs and some junior Grand Prix,
Yeah.
like who knows? Well, that'll be interesting to see.
And then we have Petrosian. I mean, she's if we're looking at what is potentially how she could be scored, then she could be the gold medal favorite for all we know. She could jump her
I
way
know.
into that medal. If we're gonna look away from the jumping technique issues, which often that is the case. Um, and these big quads, which we don't have in the women's field, that can mean a lot for PCS, and we've seen it before that it's a PCS booster just based on that fact. One thing I will say though is the entire women's field better be very, very thankful that Mao Shimada is not old enough to compete at the Olympics
I know.
because she would win. She would win.
Isn't it months? Literally, she missed it by months.
I think so, but she's probably going to go back to Junior Worlds and win for a fourth time. I know people are very, very, they're happy to see the age lift or gone up to 17, but then you see someone, this is much like Mao Asada in 2006,
I
where a
know.
lot of skating fandom, even though they were opinionated about everything, they really thought Asada should have been able to go to the Olympics. Shimada's going to sit at home. If you look at her scores this year, with one less element in the junior free skate, with what she was pulling off, even these like not super high PCS, she still would have probably won Worlds this year, and she would have gone into next year as the favorite for the Olympics. So
I agree.
everyone should be happy that it's not her. Petrosian, not the same quality of skating by far, but she does have these big
No.
jumps. I'm sure. I think I saw that she was doing quad flip or trying quad flip, or I'm sure she has other quads working. Um, she has triple axel. The performance I watched from nationals, she did like a waltz jump to start the program. She slid off the edge, but even so, I mean, we go back to we've talked about this. There's only so much that you can do when you're running away with things technically on that technical score. You can drop down the PCS, but in women's, let's say you go from a 9 to a 7, that's only 16 points in the free skate because it's by 8 for
Yeah.
every 10 points. So it's if she boosts herself up that far and they give, they throw these high GOEs out, then she could be in there for a medal, honestly. One thing, I mean, I'm curious to know, let's jump right into this, but this fan reaction, I think in the event that she now becomes an Olympic favorite, how do you think the fans, especially North American fans, because this is what we see the most of, we see that, Amber Glenn, Alyssa Liu, Isabel Levito, Kari Sakamoto, even Wakabe Higuchi these are like the favorites, right? And these
Yep.
are, and everybody's sentimental, like, we love them so much. And now you have this Russian that is going to come in and potentially upset all of this. What do
That's
you think the
never competed
reaction's
in
going to be?
seniors.
Yeah, exactly.
Very negative.
Yeah.
You asked me that, and my brain just like negative, negative,
Yeah.
negative.
Yeah.
That's it, and it's because of that. I think there's a lot of this resentment of this idea that these athletes are banned. Why are they back in the Olympics, right?
Mhm.
But then also that we have spent 4 years, and now maybe just a year or two for some, but like looking forward to this for certain skaters, and like you said, fan favorites.
Mhm.
The level of love like Alyssa Liu, Amber Glenn, Kari Sakamoto, Wakaba Gucci have like just earned from fans, just from
Mhm.
their skating, who they are as people. If one of them is in fourth place and Petrosian is on the podium, yeah, you're not going to hear the end of it. This is one of those figure skating fans have long memories. Well, we could be sitting here a decade from now, and literally people will still be talking about it.
Yeah.
We still talk about 98 ice dance, I talk about it in different reasons where I'm like, there was no controversy,
No,
but
there's
like we still
not.
talk about it, you know?
Speaking of which, like a lot of people are not too hot on Russia, but let's remember Canada had this judge that's let's flashback really quick. They had this judge that
Oh,
recorded a conversation. She went along exactly with
the
what the
plan
other
that
judge
she
was suggesting. This plan did not work out. I mean, it's confusing because on the recording it made it sound like Born and Kratz shouldn't have been on the podium, but this is how they wanted them to vote. Anyways, she went along with this plan. She said fine. She actually went to the extreme and put Born and Kratz, I think, second in the free dance in the Nagano Olympics, which is insane. But anyways, she then later on goes to authorities and says, "Oh, this is a scandal. Like this whole sport is rigged." She went along with this plan. She didn't get what she wanted. So then, she cries wolf.
and remember
Anyways,
that she's the
th-
only judge that
yeah,
voted exactly
yeah,
like the plan
yeah.
presented to her.
Yeah, and then she gets the Order of Canada as this whistleblower who's trying to the integrity of the sport. It just baffles my mind. The whole thing baffles my mind. She was no whistleblower.
Right.
She was somebody that didn't get that she what she wanted, and then she tried to
And
apply it
the
to everybody else.
idea that Born and Kratz somehow should have been on the podium is just laughable beyond all laughability.
Yeah.
Like if you watch the program, look at their feet, count how many difficult steps or turns you see in that free dance. One. Between both people, there's one, and it's a
And
mohawk.
what did Pasha
It's a
Gershuk
mohawk.
say?
Pasha was like, I could learn that in a week and do it better.
She could have learned it in a day. I
She could
mean,
learn
she
that in a
was
day
yeah,
and done it
yeah,
better. No, for
yeah.
real.
Yeah.
Wow.
So just that was a complete side note. But so we do see, the reaction from the rest of the world towards Russia right now is not too hot. I think unfortunately a lot of people that don't know the rules are suddenly going to become jump rotation experts
Yeah.
and jump edge experts like they always do with skaters they
And
don't like.
and
And
I'm gonna say this too as a fan of basically all the skaters I mentioned. I'm
Hmm.
gonna feel that too. I will. I will feel a certain level of this skater got cheated, even if objectively I shouldn't. Everyone's
Hmm.
just competing in the rules presented to them.
Hmm.
But as an Uber, as a fan, I am gonna feel a certain way, especially
Yeah.
if one of my favorites is fourth place.
Yeah.
Put
So,
that
what do
out
you
there now.
think? We talked about this before. We briefly touched on how North America has all the feelings about everything, typically, as far as online fandom goes. And you have the Japanese fans that seem to just be supportive of everybody and they really truly love the sport for what it is. And then you have a lot of the Europeans who are just kind of like, "Ugh, I don't really care.
Right.
This is their general whatever." But now you have the Olympics in Italy. You're obviously going to have people from all over the world that are attending these Olympics. But what do you think the general reaction to these Russian skaters in the event that they qualify? Again, we're taking two steps ahead by
Oh,
assuming they're qualifying, but what do you think the reaction is going to be?
I like in the crowd, like so, the Olympic audience is not a figure skating audience. They're just whoever could afford these
Hmm.
tickets and won the lottery. So
Hmm.
I don't think they're gonna know the difference. I don't think they're gonna follow this controversy. I don't think they're gonna know the drama over the last 4 years in the sport about this.
Hmm.
It, I think nothing. So let's say this was a North American audience. Let's say this was at Boston Worlds. You probably could hear her boos, possibly. I
Hmm.
think there was a potential for that. I think back to Sequanta when the crowds booed him when he would come
Yeah.
out to try to present
Yeah.
medals,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? You could
Or in
might
the
see that.
audience when he waved.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or the audience just stay silent, something like that. I don't know if audiences today are as kind of willing to boo as they were back then. Figure skating audiences tend to be really positive, happy people.
Hmm. Yeah.
So we'll
Yeah.
see. But at home, I'm sure a lot of people will be booing at home in
One
North
thing
America.
but the one thing that I think is interesting too is it seems like fans are much more heated about the women's skaters.
They are.
Tuperidze has had almost all of them, and I think this is a big part of it because they do not like Eteri Tuperidze for a multitude of reasons, and by extension, they don't like any skater that chooses to stick with her or whatever it is. But then we look at the men, and I think if we're looking at the reaction and we're looking at the hardcore fan reaction, I can almost guarantee that there's going to be a big outcry over Petrosian whatever she places. If she places third or if she places 20th, there's going to be something wrong with her placement. But then Gumennik, I think that if he would be the one chosen again, these are all hypotheticals. I don't think that the reaction would be nearly as severe or
Oh, I
opinionated.
agree.
I think that people would actually maybe support him in a roundabout way or find things to like about his
I,
skating. I just feel like that's how it's always been.
like this whole idea of like us having favorites and then, Petrosian displacing one of them. I just go back to the idea of when Tutberidze was dominating women's skating and it was all her skaters.
Hmm.
And there was not a lot of sympathy for any of them except Kosternaya.
Hmm.
For some
Oh yeah, it's
reason,
true.
we
Yeah.
all forgave Kosternaya. I don't know why. Um, other than the fact that her skating, in my opinion, was just better
Hmm.
jump technique, except,
Hmm.
the flip and lutz. But other than that, I really couldn't say it. Maybe too, there just wasn't as the men just weren't as much of a threat because they weren't. They were
Right.
wildly
Right.
inconsistent,
Right.
whereas the women skaters were very consistent.
Always at the top. Yeah.
Right. And so maybe it was like one of those I never saw you as a threat, therefore I never associate you as one. And
Hmm.
when a Russian male skater ends up skating really well, like when Kontraktuk won Euros, I think everyone's just like, "Oh, this is great. What a breath of fresh air. Yay."
Hmm.
As opposed to, "Oh, that's right. Which one won this time? Okay, whatever."
Hmm.
And it really became like that. I felt like it was a which one won
Very
mentality.
interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Just we were talking about this, and I had a flashback to 2011 Worlds and
Oh.
Daisuke Takahashi. I don't know if you remember, he had the blade problem, and they're working on it in the at the side of the rink, and they show Cinquanta in the audience, and he's like totally mocking what they're doing, trying to fix this skate blade. And the camera was on him, and he was sitting right next to Scott Hamilton because at this time Scott Hamilton was trying to bring back this whole pro circuit of competitions. So he was very heavily in ISU trying to get this to come about, and it
Mhm.
never did. But anyways, they're showing Cinquanta, and he's like mocking the twisting of the screwdriver, and it gets caught on the on the big screen. You're just like he just freezes. I just had a flashback to that. I don't think I've seen that probably since it happened, but for whatever reason, you said his name, and that's the vision I got. So yeah, but going back to this, I do feel like the Tutberidze effect is very strong, although I feel like people always kind of had sympathy for even Morisi when he was skating with her. So I don't I think like I said, a lot of people seem to become experts. They became experts with Davis and Smolkin in dance, and they see all the faults of them, but nobody else. So I think it's just so heavily emotional based on
It
their
is.
dislike of someone that is by extension. That yeah, the men there was always Koliata was leading the way for a little while, and I feel like everybody loved him, and for good reason. He was a brilliant, brilliant skater. Um, Kondrashik, not so much, but it was just that on the edge, like terrifying technique that I think
I
was exciting.
know.
That's that Salchow technique and that axle technique. I just talk about whipping yourself up and hoping you're going to land the jump. But even I was very excited for him
Me
to win
too.
Europeans. It was a breath of fresh air, and it was unexpected. And just when a skater is just so wild, it adds to that level of intensity because you don't expect it to happen. But yeah, so I do agree though. I think that the men haven't really for a long time. I mean, Plushenko was in and out of there, but before that, it was like Yagudin. And then in the last 20 years, besides those two, there's never been really anyone that's pushing for the top spot.
Yeah.
So it's like, who cares where they place? I don't have to put all my emotional energy into disliking this person if they're not going to be a threat anyways. So yeah, I do think that Petrosian will probably have it hard. Um, I know that she's done interviews where she said her one and only goal is the Olympics.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, I, I hope that it's not a complete, mess against her for again reasons that are really outside of her control. And she is selected as a neutral athlete, so there's that dissociation that we have for her. But it is going to make things interesting. I will say if they would have added a dance team, even if it was Stepanov Abukin, who were typically stuck in this like 5 to 6 or 7 or 8 range, that's another team coming back that's going to throw everything up in the air for dance, and then we would have talked all about that
I
for
know.
an hour. But we don't have that, and we don't have the pairs, which is actually a huge thing because that would have been the one that was
Yeah.
probably
The
besides
most
women.
impactful for
Yeah,
qualifying competition. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So that is it. Anything else you've seen this week that's interesting?
Um, we haven't got into it. I know this kind of took precedence, but the requirements for the rhythm dance and the free dance
Yeah,
next
we'll
year
talk
came
about all.
out, and we'll
We'll
talk
do an
all about
entire.
that.
Yeah.
But that's the biggest thing. Basically, nothing really in a direction that
Well,
sounds great.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
actually, as a nerd, I've the whole 90s thing, I started listening to a few songs and I started going back into that rabbit hole of
yeah,
nostalgia. And we're both 90s kids, so maybe we'll
yeah,
talk about that too. What
yeah.
songs you really want to hear from our childhoods?
100%. I mean, I have
Yeah.
playlists. I used to be a bartender and I was my own DJ for many years and I used to play a lot of 90s music and I have it all saved somewhere and I will tell you exactly what gets the crowd going and what doesn't work so
Ooh, I'd
much
love to
and
hear that. No,
yeah,
because I
yeah.
immediately went to just listening to the radio as a kid in the 90s in Orlando, Florida.
Yeah.
And that's music of the 90s to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but
We'll
cool.
talk about that. And also, Skate America got confirmed the day after we posted that
Oh,
video,
that's
and I
right.
said I heard that it was going to be there. I I looked and I thought about it and I actually bought tickets and then I canceled them before 24 hours was up because it's just even
Yeah.
I have a direct flight to the city that's close to Lake Placid. It's about 55 miles away. There is no transportation, no train, no bus, no shuttle, no nothing from this airport. So I was reading like what are the expected fees or prices, and you can take a bunch of different buses indirectly that takes like 3 or 4 hours, but if you would just drive yourself, it's less than an hour.
But then
Or
you're
then you
driving
take
in
an
the winter in
Uber.
November in upstate New
Exactly.
York up
And
a
then
mountain.
worrying about parking and then if you take an Uber, it's like it was quoted as being like 130 to $150 one way. And then on my return flight would be to a different city. So then I'd have to get back to Miami
Yeah.
anyways. So I'm just like adding all of
And
this up.
if you guys have never done this, we've heard from other folks who make this trek, and it is a trek.
Mhm.
Like it's very remote. Even when I looked it up, having to go, I could fly to Albany, but then it's that bus that only takes off in the
Once a
morning,
day. Yep.
right? I saw a few different companies, but yeah, once a day. But regardless, if you land in Albany after 10:30, you're not
You're
making this
stuck there for
bus.
the entire
You're
day.
stuck for the whole day.
Yeah.
So you have to stay overnight,
Yep.
and then you have to take a 4-hour bus ride.
Yep.
And then to do the same for your return.
Yep.
And literally, when I looked it up and added up all the costs, it's quicker and cheaper if I just fly to Angers, where Grand Prix France is, in the original Skate America October dates,
Right.
which is absurd.
Right. Yeah.
Especially since I also live on the East Coast, where Lake Placid is,
Right.
even if it's on the opposite side of the country in the north. But like, I know this felt like, their hands were tied. They agreed to this change, still couldn't find a venue. This was like their last resort
That's what we
backup
think. I mean, I
plan.
don't know if it was
We think
original. I don't know.
if this is the original idea, it's a terrible idea
Yeah.
just because it's ridiculous to get to. And if it's difficult for fans to get to, it's difficult for athletes. And that also means the athletes lose one more day of training or practice.
It's so off the beaten track. I want everybody to look wherever they're coming from. I'm coming from a major international hub. I found a very cheap flight that flies into the airport that's tremendously closer than Albany, the one you're speaking of. And then you get to this airport and you're basically stuck. And it's just adding hundreds of dollars more, whether you rent a car, whether you take this Uber both ways. The hotel options are very limited and they're priced
And
very
expensive.
accordingly to this event because they
Yes.
know that it's here. So it's just I'm sticking to my original idea. What I think I'm going to do is just focus on nationals. That Sunday, as of right now, I don't think this schedule is going to stick, but as of right now, it says that nationals events are going to end on Saturday. The gala is Sunday. I want to leave St. Louis on Sunday and head straight to London to then get to Sheffield for Europeans and then just go to Europeans and make 2 weeks out of it and just focus on those rather than spending thousands of dollars to go
And
to
then
Lake
just
Placid.
prediction. Like, I don't know. Like, the only thing I could think of is that Sunday, since they moved up nationals to 2 weeks earlier because it's the Olympics.
Hmm.
Unless there's some other major sporting event that Sunday, no, I expect that to change and NBC to be
Right,
like,
me
no,
too.
we want
Me
the
too.
men's free for Sunday
At 3
afternoons.
p.m. to 6 p.m. Yeah, absolutely,
Right.
like it has
That
been.
like they always do
Yeah,
because they want that live slot. So unless there's
right.
another sport that's conflicting, I don't know when the Super Bowl is. I'm not one of those people who
No, it's
keep
not in
track of that.
January.
Right, it's in February, right? See,
Yeah,
even then, I'm like, I don't
yeah.
know. So yeah, I expect that to change. But yeah, I can't believe you're doing Euros too. That's
This is just hypothetical. I've gone from thinking I'm gonna maybe do the Olympic qualifying event in Beijing, and I'm like, no, I'm sticking to my Mediterranean vacation. Then I'm thinking I'm gonna do Skate America and I'm gonna do Skate Canada, and I'm like looking, coming from Miami, you would think it's easy to get these places. It's not. So I don't want to spend, 12, 13, 14 hours getting to a destination when I can easily go to Europe and it would take me 8 hours to get there. It's just to me, it's like wasting an
hmm.
entire day to go somewhere and then to get home on top of having to stay in these places for, yeah, I don't know. It's just for me. I will stick to nationals for sure. Europeans is like in the back of my mind. And then for sure worlds. I already have my Airbnb bought for worlds. So
Oh, really nice.
yeah.
There's a hotel like right across from the arena
Yeah,
at
there is, but I
Worlds.
found an Airbnb that's 1,000 feet away. That was much cheaper. So 1,000 feet. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's
Well,
done. That's one thing.
yeah.
But yeah, Skate America, I might go back and forth. Someone might generously say, "Hey, I have a car. We're going to be here. Just come with us." And then I might consider, something like that I know is going to come up. But for now, it's too much work. And then the whole getting home and not even going to my base airport and arriving very late one night and then in the early morning having to get back to my city anyways. I just think that it's not.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, it's
I'll,
just
I'll
too
see what the
much.
roster is and then I'll maybe change my mind. But for now,
Yeah,
it's
it was looking really expensive and time consuming just to get there. And I'm like, maybe not worth it. So if I do a Grand Prix, it'll probably be, on J, just the original
yeah,
Skate America dates in
yeah,
October. But we'll see. But yeah, the flights weren't that bad.
yeah,
Actually cheaper than
yeah. Of course, of
getting to
course. It's
Albany.
outrageous. It's outrageous to get to this remote little. And like I said, the one thing
Yeah.
about Albany is, um, often a lot of these flights you land in like Washington DC and then you take a very small charter flight from DC into Albany or even into the place I was going to go to in Plattsburgh it's like a 30 seater, and I'm just not. I'm like, no, thank you. I would rather take a full commercial size flight to get to where I need to be, and that's
Oh yeah, so like we have a regional airport, and so most of ours are those regional planes, not quite the really small like
hmm
propeller looking ones,
hmm
but they're like what is it, Canada Regional or whatever they call
No,
them.
I don't.
Yeah, really
No,
small planes.
no, thank you. Not for me. So yeah, that's about it. We will like we briefly mentioned, we're going to go over all of the changes in the ice dance
Yeah.
rule book for the new season. One of the things that I will just mention right now blows my mind, this AI thing, which we will go into so hardcore. But if you guys have not read the first few paragraphs of this, just go look at the music criteria for next year's rhythm dance and you'll see what we're talking about. We'll get into it much
Right. And your
more, but
homework is what's the intention around using the theme of decades for the rhythm dance? And does AI really work with that?
yeah.
That's your homework, everybody.
Yep. That's it. If you guys have anything that you saw or any mistakes we made or anything that points us to more information about these Russian or Belarusian skaters, feel free to send messages or post
Yeah.
comments. Um, that's all for now. And yeah, we'll be back very soon with the ice dance ranting, I will say. That's going to be a long one. But
Okay, okay,
anyways,
heard.
for now, this is
Okay.
the skating session. My name is Tony Wheeler.
And I'm Thomas Vu.
Thank you for watching.
Like, bye.